Hello, listeners and readers of AwardsWatch.com. This is Awards Watch Executive Editor Ryan McQuaid, and I'm so excited to be sharing my in-depth conversation with writer-director Andrew Patterson for his latest film. Patterson is one of the most unique, talented young voices that we have in independent cinema, with his first film, The Vast of Night, being a streaming sensation and one of the best films of 2020, and his latest film being a festival darling in 2025 at South by Southwest. I sat down with Patterson for an extensive conversation over the film's themes, the long-awaited journey for this film to get into theaters, his collaboration with star Matthew McConaughey, his discovery in Angelina LookingGlass, and what he hopes to make in the future with his upcoming films. It was a privilege and an honor to speak with Patterson about one of the best films of the year. The Rivals of Amziah King is in theaters right now, and here's my conversation with Patterson. I want to jump right in here and ask you something that I think is very unique when it comes to creating an auteur's vision, and that is getting a film in front of people's eyes. And you have had, I would say, maybe unlucky or at least unique circumstances for your first two films. You've had a film that premiered at a festival and then was held, and most people saw it in the comfort of their homes during a pandemic. Yeah. And then you had a film where I was at the premiere for it at South by, and it had this great acclaim, and then it had to carry momentum for an entire year. For yourself as an artist, how did you deal with that, about the fact that was delayed, both of those processes? How are you feeling as an artist who is desperately wants to get their film in front of people as soon as possible, the minute you deliver it? What was that waiting period like for you?
That's a very insightful question, because there is a lot to read between the lines in both of these movies. I would say you have to go back to my mental state on Vast of Night for me to answer that, which is I was getting into my mid-30s. I shot it when I was 34. I was happy with it, very proud of it, but I did not have a way into the movie industry. It's sort of like I had the wild skill set of knowing how to make movies, and had never been to a film festival, for crying out loud. Yeah. Okay. I had locked myself out of everything that is the normal set of steps because I made the gamble that if I was a good enough filmmaker, everything would get taken care of. By the way, turned out to be entirely true, and true in 1,000 ways I didn't imagine. Little things like just having people figure out how to make sure that all of the shit you put on screen checked out in terms of like art clearances and errors and omissions insurance and all these things that like I didn't think about as a creative. I just thought about those characters in that world. So I end up with that movie, very happy with it, but locked out of the festival world. Well, the festival world is not Hollywood, and it is not the film industry. That is a group of tastemakers that kind of weirdly have a hive mind mandate about what they are allowing in and what they're not. And I kind of got blocked out of that world until a festival called Slam Dance, which they just watch the movies blind. They don't know your age. They don't know if you have an agent. They don't know your gender. They don't know anything. And they brought it in. And we opened in Park City in 2019. So when I get to Park City, I kind of can't believe the reception I'm getting. All of that doubt, all of those ways that I had no belief in myself were kind of alleviated, but it took a minute for me to get used to it. So just the fact that I got a film deal, just the fact that it came out like at all, just the fact that I recouped my investment was like unbelievable. The fact that I'm getting on podcasts and interviews and having big directors that I admired want to talk to me and want to tell me that they'd love to do film with me, that was exactly what anybody that didn't know if they were ever going to make it, those feelings sustained me. And then the movie yes, it was going to come out in theaters. COVID hit, and it just sort of it ended up going to streaming, which was actually in its own way fortuitous because it had this insane audience, hundreds of reviews. It ended up catching fire in a way that maybe it wouldn't have if it had just been an indie release. Although at the time, Amazon was doing very well with their theatrical business, winning Oscars with movies like um, Manchester by the Sea and nominations for movies like The Big Sick and so on. So I felt like I was in really good hands. Then COVID sort of slowed down the way that movies get made and the style of movies and the scale of movies I wanted to make next. And that was probably the toughest window, I would say, to a degree, was I'd worked on a script about this. We took it out. People had questions about some of the decisions, and I was sticking to my guns. So we get it finished, we get it made, we get it into the festival world. And by the way, the timeline is not that odd in terms of a movie that has really strong ideas from both sides, the financing team and myself. It took us just about a year from the time we finished shooting it to the time we had a locked movie. We wrapped in middle of August 2023. We had a cut in September of 2024 that we knew we were happy with. And then we waited for South by, which was 6 months later. So that was a little bit longer, but we needed it to hit with the right people at the right moment. And once it came out of South by, it was really well received. And people were saying things to make everyone feel like we had something special here. And it was very vindicating to have that come out. So much so that it triggered the team that paid for it to start distributing movies. And so instead of just rushing it out and throwing it in a fall release in 2025, they came to me and they said, "We think that this is a summer movie. We think that this is going to be really special. We think we found your audience for it going through South by." And a year later, they said, "We're going to put it out in the summer of 2026." And based on how it's been reviewed and how audiences are finding it, I'm very grateful for all of it.
That's great. I mean, because it could feel frustrating, but it doesn't seem like that, and it seems like that's a good plan for a film like this because you want to keep that momentum going. And for me, it made total sense. You want to see
Yeah.
as many people to see this in a theater as possible, to have that unique experience at South by, but then also too, like you were saying, your first film was supposed to be in theaters. You didn't get to have
Mhm.
that experience. So it's almost like people in the theaters, they're getting to see your film here as almost like a first feature in a theater as opposed to like the
Yeah.
vast of night. And so to have that feeling, it that must feel also really great as well.
It's been wonderful to have the audience find it and for it to mean something to people. Like that's the thing that if you've made a great film, you will touch people. You will They will be thinking about it later. They will want to revisit it. And I believe in storytelling in a communal space. I don't think that's ever going to go away. I don't care how easy and I mean, there have been so many formats over the years, going back to television movies, going back to videotapes, going back to DVDs, going back. Tom Rothman, the head of Sony, talks about this. Like if cinema was going to die, it would have already died. Um, and by cinema, I mean communal storytelling in a group on a screen. I don't think that's ever going to go anywhere. And so to get a movie all the way to where it's come all the way full circle and people are watching this film in the theater I worked in when I was 18, 17, 16 years old and taking pictures next to the poster is gratifying in a way that I can't even put into words.
I want to go back to the beginning of the process of making this film, and it
Okay.
starts on the script. I know you've been an editor for 18 years, and I want to talk
Yeah.
about pacing with you in a little bit,
Hmm.
but I want to talk to you about making a world. This is
Hmm.
built within familiarity of you, of your
Hmm.
childhood,
Hmm.
of places that you and people that you knew. And I believe I read it right that you had a version of this in 2018,
Hmm.
and the pandemic allowed you to kind of, you know, expand this, make
Yeah.
it this grand epic even grander. And
Hmm.
then I would assume the editor's instinct kicks in the screenplay process
Yeah.
of getting this down from, I think it was 320 pages, if I read it right, to all the way down to the movie that we have here. From that beginning inception all the way to now, how did that all surface into the movie that you have here? What were things that you were exploring then that
Mm.
you still ended up doing, and what were things along that journey of that expansion did you find that you weren't initially talking about in your first draft?
That's great, Ryan. That's a really rich question. And I was trying to keep all of your, because you've really done your research on this. I did edit for 18 years. The first thing I ever edited was in 2001, and I was putting the finishing touches on The Vast of Night in 2019.
Mhm.
In those 18 years, I would say 85% of my time was editing.
Mhm.
And I throw in compositing and a lot of After Effects work and a lot of other things in there too. I'm just saying in post production. I would say I wrote a script that was 110, 120 pages that had a very quick through line that was young Native American woman reconnects with foster father. She loses him. She goes after the people that interrupted their lives and took everything from him and takes them down. There were three antagonists at the time that she surreptitiously takes out using elements in the some of which are still in the movie. Number one and number three survived. Number two did not. Number two was kind of one of the more interesting ones, but it was a little more basic in
Mhm.
terms of like in the first in this movie. I'm just gonna say it right now, wherever we're 8 minutes in. Spoilers ahead. She uses a really hot room to kill
Mhm.
the first guy. That one was an original one. I hadn't seen that before. Second one was going to be a rattlesnake. She finds a rattlesnake in a hive. It's literally dangling out of the hive, and its rattle wasn't working, which is true, by the way. They're evolving.
Mhm.
Snakes, rattlesnakes are evolving to where they don't rattle anymore, which is absolutely fucking terrifying. She calls a rattlesnake farm and says, "Hey, I found this thing, and it's not rattling." I'm like, "Yeah, that's the truth. That's happening. They're evolving." She takes that thing and she puts it in way of the second thief of her honey that kills him, or not kills him, but it puts him in a situation where he has to rush to the hospital, and he gets sideswiped or knocked over and he dies. The third one ends up being exactly what's in the movie.
Mhm.
A Native American woman you can't see, kind of walking around in an event where she's in sort of a last year in Marianne Bad kind of sequence where everybody's frozen in time. They can't see her. And she uses her invisibility to take out this guy and use it in a way to frame him. Okay, that's the story. That was the movie.
Mhm.
The long version is COVID hits. I just go nuts. All of a sudden, I have people wanting to make what I want to make. I have offers on the table for giant movies, and I just write like crazy. And in 4 months, it goes from being 110 pages to 360 pages and kind of chaptered.
Mhm.
And I say that because it was sort of that it was more of a novelistic approach to a screenplay. Then that only survived for about 4 or 5 months. I was writing other things at the time. I went back to that. I came back to this and I go, I'm not interested in making whatever it was going to be, 3 movies or 7 episodes or whatever. It never even got really looked at as a real thing to go out and make. And I truncated it. The editor instinct you're talking about did kick in. And really, the main thing was movies in a movie theater, cinema, movies that were adapted from books, movies that were adapted from a, a narrative, like like somebody's biography. I thought, man, the texture here is incredible. But in that 4 months where I expanded it, came the two characters that enter in the beginning of the movie that have an accident in the honey plant. The the entire plot line of the stolen honey that shows up here and there with a cop sort of looking for it. The plot of the there was the later potluck where Kateri uses a food line to hide her intentions. That informed having an earlier potluck, which is now the more people are wanting to know more about that one because essentially because it is a really strong set piece in the movie. And so that told me to make one earlier so that there would be kind of a callback. It involved expanding a swarm, which was essentially just an extraction in a prison. Very, very kind of quiet sequence, sort of the way that Soderbergh would have shot something circa 2000, where it's kind of quick, a good droning piece of music underneath it. And I expanded it to this sequence at a school where it was sort of a big set piece in the movie. And it introduced the entire idea of the river. This was all in the long draft. This is in the 360 pages. Hives are out here in the middle of the forest. We have to get them out some way. And that's where you end up having a whole sequence, a whole Huck Finn sequence of getting things back. So that is how the second version, I call them Amziah the first, Amziah the second, and Amziah the third. Okay. Amziah the third is the only thing anybody knows. Amziah the second is the 360 pages that told me how to write a book version of this and then truncate it down. So we truncate it down and we take it out and we find a financier and then we find McConaughey and then we go out and shoot the thing. But that was how it went from being short to really too long to where it landed.
Last year, I talked with Andy Jurgensen for One Battle After Another, and I had an extensive conversation about pacing and how those are massive conversations with yourself as an editor and with the filmmaker. And you have to be able to know that from the get-go, the minute the script is in your hand. And because then that's how you're going to inform your storytelling decisions, your character decisions. You are making a multi-genre film here. You're making things that is a Western, it's a musical, it is a revenge tale, it's a slice of life, it's a coming of age story. There's all these different genres here. For yourself, when you were finally getting to Amziah Part 3, as you call it,
Yeah.
when you're getting there, how are you also then when you get to shooting that, knowing that this is the type of pace, the type of rhythm that you want? Are you editing as you're going in your head? Are you editing when you have the dailies? Are you changing things on set as you're shooting it? Like how is it in the process? Because I also know that there were different cuts of the film, but
Yes.
I'm not really interested in the studio's cut. I'm interested in Andrew Patterson's cut, the film that we got, which is that this feels so confident for you and such a vision that I think only you could have done because it was in your head. So how does that come out of your head in what you see in that edit?
I hope so that it feels like the passion and the potential it had on the page ends up becoming, days of weeks and weeks of filming. And I was an editor for long enough that I actually weirdly, and this is, I don't know how to put this any other way. I in a certain era of my life, this is probably 15 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, I had become such a strong editor that I actually sort of weakened as a director because the editor could fix anything and the editor could rework things and could jump into another program like After Effects and do some flourish and like, okay. So I actually had to become a stronger director so that when I wasn't editing my own movies anymore, they could essentially be picked up and put together by anybody. That was the goal. There were things that are down to exactly how I imagined them in terms of this is on the page. We describe it on the page. I describe the tone. And then there are things that I had to know in the moment needed a lot of changes and retooling. The best example of that in Amziah the Third, the movie that everyone knows that's out in theaters, is the opening sequence. That's a everybody shows up to one place and plays a song. And I had to I had to rework that a number of times in order to make sure that the vibe I wanted on the page was preserved, that I wasn't testing anyone's patience, that I properly introduced McConaughey back into cinemas. Because by the way, the character was not written for him. It was written to just be this larger than life local sort of mayor type of his town. And so all of those things had to be preserved. But at the same time, in the edit, with my editor, Patrick Smith, who had been on massive movies, Patrick comes as the assistant editor on The Revenant, on Top Gun, on F1, which he moonlighted on that while he was working on this. And we reworked things multiple ways. And that's actually where we decided on the sort of the freeze frame sections and how to get to how to land on something for maybe 2 seconds and sort of let it turn into a 70s style opening credit sequence to give us a stronger distillation of the world. And and then other sequences are exactly as written. Like the scene where he teaches her a song in the kitchen. That's there is not another version of that. There are that is the goal. That is a 3-act structure in and of itself. It lets the characters bond in front of you, create a dynamic in front of you, and lets you be involved as a viewer. And then there's everything in between that, where we tried things or we condensed things or we intercut things. I had a really lovely editor consult on the movie named Stephen Mirioni, who's in my mind the best editor working in the world. And won an Oscar for Traffic. He was the one that edited F1. He's been everything to Iñárritu to Soderbergh to extraordinary editor. And he would take a look at cuts and help me understand maybe you can make this a little sloppier. Maybe you can speed this up. Maybe you can pull 5 minutes out of the whole thing just by grabbing 15 seconds in these places. And ultimately ended up becoming a huge learning experiment of how to cut a feature of this scale as opposed to what I'd come from, which is polishing smaller things to their perfection. And can't wait to do something where I take those skill sets and go at them earlier rather than later. Because in this movie, for example, I did not edit during production. I couldn't. There was too much going on. And I needed to sort of carefully let Patrick take over the movie because this was my baby. And Patrick became essentially the best editor I could have ever asked for a movie of this scale with this many moving pieces.
I want to talk about world building for yourself because I know that
Sure.
all this comes from people and places and towns and stuff that you grew up in Oklahoma, and the movie
Yeah.
takes place in this, but you're shooting this film in Alabama,
Yeah.
which is, I think, different.
Didn't plan on it. Not that I didn't want
Yeah.
to. It was when these movies come together, you have to basically the economics of independent film require you to utilize the state incentives. And for
Mhm.
whatever reason, at the time we were shooting Amziah, setting it up, the state where I live in, where all of this was based and was going to be shot,
Mhm.
they rejected the application for whatever other movies or TV they were doing at the time.
Mhm.
And so we went to Alabama and found the places and spaces and world there.
I was going to ask you about working with your production designer, working
Yeah.
with your crew to find those places and because they feel so unique, but also you have a vision when you're writing this. You
Yeah.
spend
Yeah.
years writing this, and also you know it because you. There's
Yeah.
one thing of when like you just write go to this bar or whatever, but you specifically are like thinking of places from your
I
from your
was.
from your life. So how was the process about finding some of these places like the school or places like the river sequence or
Yeah.
just this town in general for you to be able to transfix your worldview of Oklahoma with an Alabama setting?
I learned on the vast of night to be a little bit um malleable
Mhm.
on locations, which is funny because I've written a script in the last year where it very much takes place in one place in the world and will navigate that as I
Mhm.
move towards making that movie. But this one was interesting because I had a really strong. I mean, you talked about my production designer, Katie Hickman, who came on without me knowing her and sort of figured out how to crawl into my mind. And I connected her with people that owned the honey business that a lot of this was based on. And she had them go shoot hundreds of photos and she sort of rebuilt the rooms that we needed and rebuilt. the spaces. She also knew that I'm real camera centric, meaning, look, I'm gonna have a lot of moving cameras. These sets need to be the kind of places I shoot 360. But the other thing was I ended up having a really strong locations manager named Danny Mays, who came in later, because we were having a lot of trouble finding the spaces I needed, which is probably my own fault, because I had imagined things so vividly out of the world that I had known. And he's the one I could give him. I can give you a great example. He would find things that weren't necessarily what I imagined, but they were as strong as anything I imagined, and in some cases better. But for example, he's the one that figured out where we could basically buy a railroad for a big part of the big finale sequence. He figured
Mhm.
out, he brokered the deal. He showed me a drone shot. Danny essentially helped me see the way that we could rewrite the sequence, not even rewrite. That is not what I do. Fit it to the resources and the spaces available.
Revision it
And
in a way.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he was the one that showed me, look, this train goes here. We have access to it for here. We can run it back for 2 miles. You can have like, you can lose it here. You can turn a corner here. It can surprise the audience. It was like, dude, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so I ended up leaning into a lot of what he was doing, and then morphing the world to that. You know, that's the best way I can describe it. There were other things that were not going to change in my mind, like the large potluck venues. I knew that those needed to be like a rec center with a stage with, certain kind of lighting. I knew that Amziah's kitchen needed to be tight and needed to have wood paneling. I knew that um, I knew that the honey plant, we had to build out and diagram what a honey plant looks like in a way so that when Kateri re-enters another one and uses that as a weapon, we knew what that was without you ever saying a word.
Mhm.
So I appreciate, and I'm so grateful for the people that came on the movie. But I did have to change the way that I saw some things, and don't ever feel like I compromise. It came through. The goal of the movie came through in every location, and am now very grateful that we used Alabama because they were fantastic partners.
You mentioned the potluck scenes. They're fantastic. They
Yeah.
say a lot
Thank
about
you.
your characters, without having to say these are our characters. This is our setting. And then you have, though, with that potluck scene, connection. The bees
Hmm.
are with connection. The music is about connection. It's about
Hmm.
building community. Can you talk about using these moments or these things to connect your characters rather than just other standard tropes that you could do and things, because it
Mm.
feels very connected in the culture rather than it be about just settings in a film. It feels like you're making cultural decisions there with these characters rather than and personal decisions rather than just story decisions.
I would be, well, it's a fantastic question, Ryan. I would say I don't know that I was thinking that much, so much as just feeling what I wanted to maybe see in a movie. I do have sort of a fixation of people working together towards a goal,
Hmm.
and that's becoming a theme over multiple scripts. And in The Vast of Night, it was about two kids trying to find out the truth and chasing a signal into the night, and it was about working together. Um, this one ends up being a lot about um, the the way that a community actually feels when they're in unison and not sort of divided. And I don't know that I set out to write it like that. I just think that I can tell you this. This is really interesting because I can tell you I didn't. In the longer form version of this, everything in that potluck room was a discrete scene that played out. And then the next thing you did was you cut to later on when Amziah starts to take his foster daughter into the bee yards for the first time. And when I truncated it, when I learned what I was really making, when I'd taken the novel script and shrunk it down, first thing that happened is those two scenes, totally disparate on the page, smashed together. And I started to realize I'm going to be going back and forth. And when I figured out I was going back and forth, the parallels of like this sort of warm, honey drenched hive of humans eating and moving around this room, and then this group of insects taking care of each other, that became sort of the editor in me saying, I guess maybe it was in there subconsciously because I'd written it all already. But it wasn't until I adapted my own script back down to a feature length that those things hit me the way it did. And I I don't like to sit around and act like I've made something super, like I'm proud of that scene in a way that maybe if that was the only thing that was left of the movie, that would probably be the indication or the encapsulation of something magical that I didn't really even anticipate, that I can weirdly take credit for, but at the same time, um, would will be very we'll be looking for those opportunities in movies to come, because that actually was sort of fortuitous and other energies at work.
You're working with a movie star, a
Very
massive
much
movie star,
one of the few, yeah,
one of the
in my
few.
opinion.
I
Yeah.
mean, a guy that literally just got a theater named after him. So,
I
and
was
it's in
there. I
Austin,
gave him
and
this.
yeah,
I gave him the opening speech
there you go. And
to
so,
tell him. Yeah.
I wondered what it's like working with this movie star. That's the biggest movie star in one of your first in your two features. The trust that you have, he's playing this titular character, but also at the
Mhm.
same time, he's not going to be. You know this. He's not going to be in the film the whole time. But
Mhm.
there is this sense of he of you could lean into who he is as an actor, his
Yeah.
persona as a movie star, but also there's more to Amziah than just Matthew McConaughey. So I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you about breaking down the character with him in those conversations for him to jump on this project with you.
He was, first of all, he adored the script. Okay. He said it was the best thing I've read in 5 years. We were on a Zoom, and it took a few minutes. Matthew will joke, he'll tell you this, he's not technically very savvy. So it took a few minutes for him to figure out a way to like get the Zoom going. And when we finally saw each other and his face blinked on my Zoom, I'm looking at Matthew McConaughey. Okay. But that didn't last for very long. He sort of leaned back, he put his hands behind his head, and he goes, "Man, let me tell you, first of all, this is the best thing I've read in 5 years. And it's really fucking funny." And then he starts to go into scenes that meant something to him. And he's like, this whole scene with the honey plant and the scalping, this is, I don't know, 15, 20 pages of comedy. And I was like, yeah, yeah. And he's like, in this whole scene where we're at the potluck and we start talking about, and then we get past all the stuff that he's liking, okay? And I go, how do you feel about, you know, when your character is no longer in the movie? Same thing. He's got his hand behind his head. He's leaning back, and he basically, he can be loud. He goes, I ain't afraid of dying. I ain't afraid of death. He's like, no, now I don't want it to be, getting shot in some drive-by you know, in a strip mall somewhere. He's like, but the way that he goes out and the way that this character continues to live with these people and in the community, he's like, I ain't afraid of death. And the interesting thing is, if you take a McConaughey, like an iconic McConaughey performance, like I would
Mhm.
say Magic Mike, or maybe not Dallas Buyers Club, but a few of his really strong performances. I
I was
would
thinking
even
a
throw in
lot
there
of Mud.
Frailty.
Yeah.
Mud is a great one. Mud,
Yeah.
he's practically a supporting character, right?
Yeah.
I would say if you slammed every scene of his together, in Mud, he's probably on screen less than he is in Amziah, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading one time that Darth Vader's only on screen in Star Wars like 9 minutes or
Yeah.
something, 11 minutes. It's something ridiculous,
It's
right?
like Hannibal
Hannibal
Lecter's
Lecter,
only like 10
you
minutes,
read my
right?
mind, right? There's
There
these,
we are. We're together
right?
on this.
We're we're
Yeah.
we're 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 feeling this. Okay, so Amziah is basically the entire movie for 50 plus minutes,
Hmm.
and then some. And
Yeah.
he's certainly alive in spirit as the movie continues. And when he basically said, I get the fact that I'm not in this whole thing. I love what you did here. It's one of the best things. It's the best thing I've read in 5 years. I knew I had a partner. Now we got into it and we got really strong. And there were some big things that I would say he initially wasn't moving towards. A big one was he didn't plan on singing the way that he sings in this movie. Okay.
Mhm.
He was going to lower the octave. He was going to be like, he was basically going to like sing it lower. And we've talked about this. And I said, man, that's not where the energy is in this song. This is not how these guys sing. They're not polished. They're not going to be like baritones down here singing this song. That was a big question. Big question about, are you going to be okay with live bees? He's like, yeah, I guess I mean, I was just going to do it. I'm like, all right, so let's go do it because I would hate to have missed the opportunity to work with you. And then we really stress tested the entire story, which essentially stayed the same. Um, his biggest thing was he wanted to make sure the spirit of Amziah stayed alive in the second half. And I was like, when you see the way I'm going to use music and the things that evoke your character, and you watch how they stay alive and you feel them. Like you don't see him on screen for out of the remaining 70 minutes of the movie, whatever. I think he blinks on like for maybe 20 seconds.
Mhm.
But by the end of the movie, when it's just the young lady by herself getting sort of that warm hug from the bees, your mind is going to tell you that he's there.
Yeah.
You're hearing the mandolin, so Matthew became essentially the collaborator I couldn't have dreamed of, and now the person you can't even see the role outside of.
When the other just great thing about this film is his counterpart is Angelina LookingGlass, who is phenomenal in
Absolutely.
this
Yeah.
film. When you're casting this character, you have to
Hmm.
do two things. One, you have to have an actor that can go toe to toe with Matthew McConaughey in scenes.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
then also have to have a character actor and a persona that's going to carry your film once Matthew McConaughey is gone and has
Yeah.
to, and the audience has to trust that they can carry the second half of your film to the finish line.
Yeah.
What was it like finding her for this role and collaborating with her on this process?
It took a few auditions. I've gone into this many different places at length, so I'll jump past the fact that we got her, and then the real work began.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I would sit in there's a pretty snazzy hotel they were putting all the actors in. And I would go there and there's a large kind of billiards room and we would work the script for hours and hours. And I would help her understand tones and when a character's voice changes and the power of certain things. And I'm not an actor, but I have cut a lot of humans on camera and I have sat in places where stand-up comedians were controlling a room with their voice, or a preacher telling a sermon, or somebody a monologue, a raconteur, somebody that just knows how to hold their play. So she and I mostly worked on that. And the thing that was interesting with her is what would be the and we could name several of these movies where female protagonist loses everything somehow. I can think of two off the top of my head I will not name. And I've only seen the trailers for them, but I can tell you this, and these are substantial actresses. They are real one note after they lose everything. They
Mm-hmm.
are they are in this sort of perpetual state of bile and scowling and just they were directed to be a badass. And I found Angelina to basically not, she wasn't naturally going that way, but she also didn't, that would have been so boring to me
Mm-hmm.
if she'd been walking around like she was 19 at the time, she's 22 now. If I'd sort of directed her into a corner to where she just sort of knew she was going to pull everything off and sort of be this unstoppable female force, that's the most boring character in the world to me. I wanted to see her energy, her nuance, her concern, certain moments of fear where she doesn't know if the things she's doing, if she's going to get caught or found. I also wanted to see moments of decision where she has to rely on somebody else to help her. And all of those things she was naturally doing. And I just sort of guided her current to get her to be Kateri by way of Angelina.
Yeah. I know that Red River was a massive influence on the
For the wrong reasons,
for
but
the
yes,
wrong
absolutely.
reasons.
Yeah.
But also you're playing in this film with the idea of the American myth, and that's found in the Western. Did
Yeah.
you have, beyond just talking about that, about what Red River did in toward, to shape this film, were there other films or influences that you went to for inspiration or to uncrack the codes to get Amziah King to the finish line?
Yeah, there was, I would say the strongest ones immediately right out of the gate were there was like two or three movies about 10 years ago that were really, really powerful for me. Bullhead, which was called Run
Mm,
Scott, which is a movie about, cattle hormones and that underground of how those are moved around. That's what let me know I could do a movie set in a rural setting with crime, and bees ended up coming later. There was a movie also from Belgium. That was from Belgium. This was from Belgium, called The Broken Circle Breakdown, which is a movie about basically two people falling in love with music and folk music,
mhm,
and the loss they have, and who they become with that song, with the songs of American. It's almost country. It's more country and more bluegrass than even what we have.
mhm.
I would say that when I was watching for characters that I was looking for criteria, I would say a very strong influence was the debut, that at least to my mind, of Florence Pugh, called Lady Macbeth. And
Fantastic.
I that came out in the summer of 2017. I would say that had an oversized, long shadow on me, which you can barely see in this movie now unless I point to it and say, look at this. I'm always so much more interested in the plight of young women anyway. You know how in cinema and in storytelling, we're looking for archetypes that tell you something quickly,
Hmm.
whether it's a mentor archetype, which is usually make them old, give them make them old, give them a cane, give them a, whatever it is, whether it's in a kung fu movie or a Star Wars movie or whatever, like or if you're creating the jester character, the archetype, make them, give them something immediately that lets you know they're kind of that jester, that court jester, with a protagonist that you want to have room for nuance, but also the cards are stacked against them. I can tell you there's probably no better archetype than a young woman, period. Doesn't matter if it's Ellen Ripley or if it's Florence Pugh and Lady Macbeth or if it's Angelina Looking Glass playing Kateri. So I've always found that to be interesting, as an archetype. And then I try to build the nuance inside of those characters. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately. And then you could easily start to see influences ranging from Coen brothers to Quentin to Sergio Leone.
Hmm.
And I just trusted my gut that I could figure out a way that they would all end up in the same movie somehow.
Yeah, I was thinking of like John Sayles, and I was thinking then of some of the films that Billy Bob Thornton wrote in the
Yeah.
90s. Some of these small movies, but they have these massive themes behind it. Like one, I
Well,
was thinking of
Sling Blade,
I was even thinking One
yeah,
False Move
one false move.
in a lot of ways. This,
I've seen it. I wouldn't say that one had a huge effect on me. Weirdly enough, Sling Blade is just Shane
yeah,
when you
it
break
really
that
is.
down,
It really
right?
is.
It's a Western. Nobody
Yeah.
thinks about it like that, but it is. It's about a guy restoring the balance
Hmm.
in a family that needs help. Um, I I could go on and on, but I mean, I joke around a lot about this one. I used to joke that this was, when people wanted to know what it was, I was like, it's basically oh or no, or oh brother, where art? What did I used to say? Let me think. No country for oh brother, where art thou? That's what I said.
When you
And
match both of
then
those together, yeah,
yes, and then I would say this movie is, which is, by the way, those are two completely different tones.
yeah,
And then I would also say to people that were like, wow, this is totally different than the vast of night, I would say, yeah, this is the Raising Arizona to My Blood Simple,
there you
because you
go.
sort of look at those movies and you're like, what in the world?
Hmm.
Um, and and those are all true, but I absolutely, having grown up in the 90s, those movies have a real, I hate to say this, I don't hate to say it, but I hate to say it. The melodrama of the 90s movies are
Hmm.
is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary when you go back and watch. I don't even want to say run of the mill movies. There was just a certain heightened type of storytelling
Hmm.
that was better done.
Yeah.
in that era that we see every now and then. We'll get an extraordinary, and I don't mean melodrama as a bad word. I just mean that they knew how to heighten sort of everything going on in the movie and in the story. And don't get me wrong, they look silly almost by comparison to other 90 movies like
Hmm.
Goodfellas or um sort of more austere, closer to the grounded. But man, when those things are working, they are, I mean, Titanic would probably be the greatest example of that. But
Hmm.
you just had them all the time. And I would say I was reaching for that a little bit
Yeah.
in a way.
You've made two films now. You're unconventional ways, like we talked about, but you're
Yeah.
also saying that you're writing new stuff. Think people are throwing things at you for
Yeah.
whatever projects you can do next.
Yeah.
Uh, what is what is your current mindset going into the next projects? What are some of the things you want to explore and continue to explore? And where are you at in terms of yourself as a filmmaker? And it seems like you're a little bit optimistic or and not
Yeah.
pessimistic at this point, which is great. And how do you then continue to navigate that at an independent level? Because as you're mentioning, it's a tricky dance that filmmakers like
Mhm.
yourself have to dance in order to keep your visions alive. I was recently talking with Adam Wingard, who
Mhm.
has made small independent films that feel like him, and then he's worked it within the studio. So I'm curious for yourself, like how do you envision maybe potentially working even with a studio down the road and
Sure.
still making sure that it's an Andrew Patterson film?
Well, it doesn't matter the scale for me. I think that's number one. Scale is irrelevant.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, if I looked at my top 10 favorite movies, half of them would probably be studio, half of them would either be foreign or something that would be so small and so, like, I think about like a movie like A Man Escaped,
Mm.
Robert Bresson. That's just a guy in a cell for there's no scale to that. That is I had a buddy that wanted to know, he was trying to figure out a way to make a movie like Night of the Hunter,
Hmm.
which is a beautiful movie. And he was like, because he grew up in the town that we shot Bastard Night in. In fact, he was 19 whenever I met him. He ended up becoming my first assistant camera on this movie, on Amziah, and I'm sure he's going to become a director, a DP in his own right. He was asking me, he was saying he wanted to have a movie kind of, like a Night of the Hunter. And I go, man, Night of the Hunter, you could make for, no money, brother. Go do it. So I'm always looking at things that have no scale, but I'm also looking, the number one answer to your question though is, what is the collaboration?
Mm.
What, where is the patron partnership to get to where the work that I want to make, I can test it, I can make revisions based on the way people uh, are responding to it in the theater or not. There
Yeah.
were things that we tested with this where I abjectly ignored
Mm.
um, tests, reviews, and audiences, and there were other things where I saw it in a room with people, and I thought, man, I've got some ways I can streamline that. I've got some ways I can make that clearer. I've got some ways I can ratchet up that part of the movie. And ultimately, I do have several things at different scales. I would say right now I have something that I could just go deploy at the drop of a hat in my own backyard or in another backyard, that I'm sure the acting relationships I've developed would come running to me.
Mm.
And then I've got things all the way at the scale of a studio film that I'm working on a script for right now. I can't divulge anything else about it, but I also have originals that I've written that I would love to get made at the studio level. But I want the relationship and the collaboration to be able to create the thing and to put my best foot forward, and and to face sort of the judge and the jury of the audience before I'm sent through a bunch of notes and revisions at a
Hmm.
studio level. But I will say there are some studios emerging that seem to understand that. In particular, I look at Warner. I look at what Ryan Coogler was able to do. I look at even what Maggie Gyllenhaal was able to do. I look at what they're gonna, what they've allowed filmmakers to try. And there's been some wild things coming out of their studio that's really exciting. New Line seems to have a little bit of that. I'm excited to see what they do with Clockwork.
Mhm.
I'm excited really just to find the right collaboration each time out. And that will tell me what movie I'm going to make next. And the thing is, you need buy-in. You need people that read the script, love it, want to see what you're doing, and eventually how to make it the thing that means the most to the most viewers.
Mhm.
And that that takes some time. It takes a relationship. And I do have different things that I want to do at different scales, but um, I honestly just love being in the world that I've in these worlds that I've created, regardless of if they're um, intimate and small or if they scale up. So that's my non-committal way of giving you a non-committal answer, but at the same time saying I hope to have something that people know I'll be making, in the months to come.
That's one of the best non-committal answers I've ever gotten about
I
that.
hope so.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
you see how it
I
is.
know, man. I
Yeah,
know. Andrew, I got one more for you. This is a bit
let's do it.
more of a fun one, but I think it also speaks a lot about you. Is that these potlucks, going back to it,
Hmm.
these places in the film, they speak about who the character is based off of just even the dish that they are bringing,
Hmm.
the dish that's being served based off of them. For yourself, if you're at a potluck, Andrew Patterson, what are you bringing? What does that dish say about you? Not just as a filmmaker, but as a person, and what you're bringing to the table there.
That's great. That's a fun question. It would without a doubt be fried chicken
Yes.
because that's about the only thing I know how to make. And I got kind of good at that one dish,
How did
and
you learn about that? Like, was this your family, or did you
I
just
think
learn that during
so.
COVID, or what was
My
that?
mom made it. My mom made it growing up at home, and I liked her recipe. And I got a pretty good recipe of it a few years ago. I don't know, probably 12, 15 years ago.
Hmm.
I only make it a couple of times a year. And I would just say that it's not the healthiest food, but it also is something that everybody loves.
Yeah.
And if I was to draw a correlation between that and the work I've maybe done so far, is I do want things that people all pull up a seat to and enjoy together. Um, and I think Amziah as a movie kind of feels like that. Kind of
Hmm.
feels like, oh, this is a lot of different things. Is it the kind of movie I want to watch, you know, 10 times out of 10? Oh, I don't know, maybe. Is it the healthiest thing? Oh, I don't know, maybe. But it also just feels like the kind of thing that once you're eating it and sharing in it together, um, the connection is going to emerge. And that's what I would say, hopefully, if I ever drop off a dish at a local potluck, that's what it would be to people.
I think it's about comfort, and that's why you made this
Yeah, I
film.
love that.
And it's one of the best films of the year, Andrew. I
Oh,
loved it
Ryan,
back
you're
at
too
South
good to me.
by.
Thank you. Yeah.
I hope everybody continues to see it in theaters. And thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. Glad we could do this.